Most likely, you've seen Titanic 12 times. But after what you're going to see? The movie will never be the same for you. Titanic is undoubtedly one of Hollywood's most meticulously produced movies. Past. Authenticity was the goal of every line, every costume, and every shot. However, despite the fixation on perfection, a number of errors have been overlooked. Editing, and some of them are so incredible that you'll see why the creators made a great effort to conceal them. 21. The accident with the emergency axe glass. A brief instance during one of the most people overlook the Titanic's intense sequences on their first viewing. Rose is sprinting through attempting to survive in the flooded hallways. She pauses at a fire emergency box at one point. That has an axe behind a glass window. Rose breaks the glass and reaches for the axe to assist. Set Jack free. Everything appears to be okay until it isn't. Because if you focus on the following after a few shots, an odd thing occurs. The glass she just smashed fractured in large parts. Is back all of a sudden. Completely undamaged, appearing as though nothing had ever touched it. There isn't a shot of it being replaced, nor is there any further sound of glass breaking. How did the glass seem to mysteriously remain intact in between cuts? This scene is undoubtedly one of those blink and you miss it blunders, but once you see them, you can't help it. And soon after this specific scenario, there's another startling blooper that will make the movie's logic is called into doubt. 20. The rubber axe in Rose. At one of the most tense times, Jack is chained to a pipe in a room that is rapidly flooding in the movie, and after Rose she tries to break the chain that is binding him after grabbing the axe. It is intended to be tight and intense, yet upon closer inspection, there is a glaring editing error in the scenario. Rose isn't in the ideal situation to start. It's evident from her angle that if this were genuine, she most likely would have missed, and worse, she might have received Jack's arm rather than cuff. That's not the only startling aspect of this image, though. When she lowers the axe, the head on impact, the axe bends and flops dramatically. The axe was actually composed of rubber. A common precaution for situations such as these. However, it wasn't meant to be so clear. On the screen, the illusion is momentarily destroyed by the way it bends. Rather than a life-saving tool, it appears to be a play prop that is inappropriate for such a stressful scene, and it certainly makes once you notice it, this scene seems a little awkward. 19. The window is being broken by the water. Because it's hidden in one, it's simple to overlook. Of the film's most intense and tumultuous scenes. In the scenes of the ship flooding, water bursts through the ship's windows. It's quick, dramatic, and obviously intended to demonstrate how things are becoming more intense. However, if you closely re-watch it, an odd event occurs. It appears that the water smashes the four windows in two entirely distinct methods. The water bursts through the first, second, and third windows in a single frame before the final window. But in a different picture, the water comes in through the first, second, third, fourth before going through the third at last. The scene and setting are the same, yet the angles and the way the glass breaks don't line up. And the reason for that is that the scene was captured on camera several times by the filmmaker, and instead of selecting a single version, the editors ultimately used shots from many perspectives. The shift in water appears small at first glance, but once you notice it, the flow is clear. Naturally, it has no bearing on the plot, but it does show how frequently, for maximum intensity, these scenes had to be res-hot. In an effort to put together the optimal course of action, the water told on them, and continuity faltered. 18. The glass door reflected the cameraman. This specific editing error is most likely one of the most difficult to locate, but once you see it, you can't take it away. In one particular scene, Jack enters the ship's upper-class section for the first time. It's a significant occasion. He's going to the camera moves to display things from Jack's perspective as they enter Rose's realm. He's moving through tasteful doors, taking in the immaculate interiors, and we, the viewers, are expected to experience it as though we were looking through his eyes. However, if you slow it down and pay great attention to the something shouldn't be there, glass door. The cameraman is clearly reflected in it, showing up in the glass. It's a real silhouette with camera gear rather than just a blur. Although it happens swiftly, it is unquestionably present. Bloopers of this type are frequently seen in films that entail glossy surfaces, particularly when they employ real-world sets rather than computer-generated pictures. But it's shocking that something went wrong in a film as well-made and costly as Titanic through. Although it's supposed to be Jack's perspective, it briefly changes get a behind-the-scenes glimpse. 17. The disappearing suspenders. It's simple to overlook this one unless you're truly focusing. When Rose is attempting to break the shackle in the dramatic scenario off Jack, it's easy to overlook the outfit continuity problem. In a single shot, Jack obviously wears his suspenders over his shirt. However, when Rose does swing the axe and shatters the cuff, suddenly, the suspenders are gone. Why did the middle's fashion suddenly change? Of an emergency involving life or death? The simple answer is that they used stunt doubles. Leonardo DiCaprio did not perform the cuff-breaking shot, it was a stunt actor filling in for him. It appears that someone neglected to replace the suspenders on. Thus, Jack's suspenders emerge as if by magic as the camera moves to the following scene. They were never absent. This tiny detail totally disrupts the scene's flow, but will undoubtedly make you laugh when you see it. 16. The beauty mole in motion. Rose could have been perfect in each picture, but her mole, which some consider a beauty mark, not very much. If you'll notice if you focus on her face throughout the movie, particularly in close-ups. Something odd. Her distinctive mole, which gives her a little of extra glitz in certain situations, beauty takes on different aspects. It appears on her right cheek in certain pictures. In others, it ends up on the left for whatever reason. Flipped film is most likely the cause of this. A typical editing technique to improve action flow or align angles. However, flipping anything on one side of a person's face ends up on the other, according to the photograph. It's not a component of although the audience is meant to notice, it becomes strangely distracting once you do. In a film where a moving beauty mark is undoubtedly a highly awkward editing technique because everything was designed to look flawless. Editors do not want you to be caught when you fail. 15. Wires that are visible during stunt fall. As the Titanic starts to disintegrate, passengers are hurled in all directions. People are tumbling down the deck, and everything is in complete disarray. Tumbling down the railings and into the freezing lake below. However, in one of those dramatic sometimes, if you stop at the ideal moment, you'll see something break. The delusion. The force of the breakage pulling one of the performers downward. The ship is obviously connected to visible wires. The cable's purpose was to regulate the descent and maintain the safety of the stunt, which makes sense. However, they weren't meant to be seen in the last cut. A couple frames somehow were lost in the haste of the scene and the quick editing, where, against the black background, the wire and harness are easily visible. It's simple to overlook, particularly on your initial viewing, but this blooper truly sticks out, particularly when you abruptly learn that the actor was pulled by an off-screen rigging device rather than the ship. However, there are theoretical errors in addition to editing errors and physical bloopers. These are equally as startling as the actual ones in Titanic. Among them are narratives, remarks, beliefs, and incidents that simply don't make sense due to how historically this next blooper is inaccurate. 14. Rose's reference to Sigmund Freud. Rose is intelligent, funny, and well-read. That's the portion of what set her apart from the society from which she sprang. However, one of her astute comments actually makes mistakes in terms of historical correctness. In the first class, there is a clever little moment. Rose makes a severe jab at Sigmund Freud in the dining room. During a meal with her stiff mother, her conceited fiancé, Cal, and others of the ship's elites, the topic of the Titanic's naming comes up. Ismay declares with pride that it was selected to stand for strength and size. Rose interrupts at that point and inquires as to if he is familiar with Sigmund Freud, adding that he might be especially interested in his thoughts regarding the male obsession with size. It's a humorous scenario and a clever punch. Rose's mother is appalled, while some others chuckle. Ismay ignoring the offense entirely, he inquires as to whether Dr. Freud is a traveler. However, here's the issue is that, at least in 1912, that clever one-liner shouldn't have existed. Freud, Sigmund had not yet released his theories linking size and masculinity at the time, and those concepts emerged only after the Titanic sank. Rose's remark was therefore insightful and far ahead of it was also historically incorrect at the time. Therefore, even though her famous line adds a contemporary intellectual flavor to Rose's character, it's evident that the screenwriters included cultural information from a different era into the world of 1912. 13. Inaccurate red lipstick for Rose's era. Over the course of the movie, Rose stands out not only for her appearance but also for her personality, particularly her timeless red lipstick. It perfectly captures the bright, rebellious energy of her. However, historically, that cosmetic decision would have many eyebrows were raised. Red lipstick wasn't considered sophisticated or stylish in 1912. Stylish for women from higher social classes. In actuality, actors were frequently linked to cosmetics. Dancers, as well as lower-class women. For a wealthy individual such as Rose, wearing strong lipstick in public would have been inappropriate for someone who was well-bred and under constant inspection. Regarded as improper, even scandalous. Women in high society at the time tended to lean toward natural looks, frequently with minimal powders or no makeup at all. Red lipstick didn't become popular or in style until the 1920s, when flapper culture made it daring and fashionable. Therefore, Rose's lipstick was more than just a striking fashion choice. The producers added a small contemporary touch to make her character more visually appealing. Edge and allure. It functions flawlessly on screen, but if you are aware of your past, it's a subtle information that isn't entirely consistent with the era. 12. The ship shots contain visual effects errors. James Cameron put his all into creating Titanic scenes authentic. And he was pretty much spot on. However, a few instances of visual effects didn't quite hold up, particularly when viewed from a contemporary perspective. First, let's discuss broad views of the ship. These breathtaking photos frequently depicted the Titanic sailing in all its splendor, with people hopping around on deck. However, most individuals are unaware of that. The wide views of the ship itself showed a detailed scale rather than a full-sized warship model. Thus, small human figures were inserted using early technology to make it appear occupied. Ways for modifying computer-generated images. It becomes a little weird at that point. Because several of these pictures show individuals strolling around the deck, they have stiff bodily motion, abnormal pace, and repeated, robotic movements. Some don't even seem to cast appropriate shadows, which merely results in a brief instant where the realism dips, and the ship begins to resemble a cutscene from a video game instead than a historical tale. The moment where individuals leap off the ship as it is sinking at the end is another. Stunt doubles and special effects were used in several of these falls. However, a few of the jumpers that have been modified appear oddly weightless or unnatural. They don't move their limbs realistically, and they fall in a manner akin to dolls being thrown into the air. These sequences just demonstrate that for a film with an enormous budget and excellent in the 1990s, Titanic also had its limitations in terms of talent. The aspirations were lofty, and though not always flawless, execution was close. 11. Does a ghost open a door? In the iconic moment where Jack depicts Rose as one of his French girls, there is a supposedly intimate moment. And strained. The scene is remembered by all. With her heart racing, Rose enters the room wearing a robe. However, what occurs just before she enters is what most people miss. Look more closely. Rose appears to be making a spectacular entrance by herself as she enters. However, if you slow it down, you'll notice anything strange after a short while. She never opens the door on her own. Rather, for a brief while, a hand can be seen yanking the door open from the inside. This hand is probably that of a crew worker who was not supposed to be on camera. A tiny bit of behind-the-scenes glimpse into one of the movie's most famous sequences. After you observe how it seems amusing at the time, as if Rose is being subtly thrust into a situation where she is expected to enter with dignity. It merely serves as a reminder that ultimately, this was a set, with workers working behind the camera to perfect each scene. And even flawlessness occasionally requires some off-camera assistance. 10. The disparity in Titanic design. The Titanic as portrayed by James Cameron is exquisitely detailed. The enormous decks, the lengthy hallways, and the grand staircase all have the feel of a living museum. However, the majority of fans are unaware of this. The actual Titanic's design differed from the movies in a number of significant ways. First off, one of the movie's most recognizable sets, the grand staircase, was inspired by not a perfect duplicate, but it is inspired by the original. To create a dramatic impression, the size and form were changed. That's not all, though. The lovely dome above it is not exactly the same as the original. The skylight of the ship. Additionally, there are several sequences in Cameron's adaptation that use glass doors and windows that are far more refined and spacious than those found on the Titanic. Actually, many areas of the ship were less aesthetically pleasing and more enclosed than the movie depicts, particularly in the sections designated for second and third class. And the smokestacks are another. There was one on the actual Titanic, although it was primarily ornamental and had little use. Plays it straight, demonstrating the functionality and activity of all four. It's clear that the filmmakers certainly made some changes to make scenes seem more expansive, dramatic, and emotionally charged. Strong. Were they correct, though? Not totally. 9. The disappearing crowd at the dock at the start of the movie were presented to the Titanic in all of its splendor. People are expressing their emotions, cheering, and waving. Farewells. There's a lot of excitement on the pier. Additionally, when the ship eventually starts to move away, to wave it off, there is a gathering at the harbor. However, in a subsequent frame, they suddenly disappear. From one perspective, the dock is crowded with people brandishing handkerchiefs and caps. Color, movement, and sound are all present. It seems genuine. The scene then switches to an alternative wide picture of the wharf abruptly becomes empty as the ship departs. No passengers were waving. Nothing to move. Simply a large, serene harbor. What took place? The production team probably employed two distinct shooting days or even distinct techniques, such as one that uses a model or actual extras, early rendition of the ship using computer-generated visuals. Additionally, continuity during that shift slipped. At first, it's a minor blooper, but as you realize it, it gets difficult to avoid seeing. The emotional farewell moment becomes less powerful when the thrill from one clip to another, the audience vanishes. 8. Blood appears too soon on the scene of the serious confrontation where Rose, when she eventually confronts her domineering fiancé, Cal, she strikes a blow that people continue to applaud. A physical altercation results from the altercation, and Rose approaches Cal. However, if the scene doesn't unfold as neatly as it should if you pay close attention. Prior to Rose's hit lands, Cal's hand is already covered in red paint, which is designed to simulate blood. That's correct. His knuckles are already smeared with red before he even responds to the blow. He then wipes his palm across his nose a few seconds later, as though the injury had just been brought on by the blow. It's a classic failure of continuity. The red had already been applied by the props or makeup crew. Paint, and the editing was insufficient to conceal it. Thus, rather than the harm showing up, it arrives a whole beat ahead of the hit, transforming the entire scene into a little of a visual error. For the majority of spectators, the moment passes too fast for them to notice. You can't unsee it once you see it, though. 7. Jack's nose suddenly becomes icy. The conclusion of Titanic is among the greatest poignant moments in the history of film. Jack is clinging on Roses in the icy water, muttering his parting remarks. It's painful, chilly, and captured on camera to reveal every little specifics. Ironically, though, those minute nuances weren't always consistent. In a single close-up of Jack's face is in the water, and his nose is clean, it's just wet and pale, with neither ice nor frost. However, in a solid clump of ice is seen hanging from his nostril in the very following frame, taken from a different perspective. How in a few seconds did that freeze in place? This is probably due to the fact that the scene was spanning several days, in various lighting, weather, and makeup configurations. Maybe the special effects crew added a little more frostbite realism at some point, although they neglected to align it with the cuts. Consequently, Jack's nose changed from being somewhat warm to at the blink of an eye to Elsa levels of frozen. in a setting meant to feel unvarnished, and this continuity failure really sticks out. Sixth, the flashlight that is unnecessary. Now let's discuss the flashlight moment. It's as brief and doesn't really jump out, but if you pay close attention, you'll find another goof that is historically incorrect. In one scene, the officers of the ship are looking for Jack and Rose in the midst of the mayhem. Everyone is in a panic, it's dark, and the police whip out a few flashlights to scan the area. Although most people would consider this to be normal, there is an issue. As you can see, the bright white light beams like those found in modern halogen or LED flashlights. Although the piercing white light could have appeared cinematic, it didn't exist in 1912. The most popular handheld torches at the time would have had a warm, yellowish radiance, courtesy to early carbon filament technology or vintage incandescent light bulbs. In essence, instead of the laser-like beams we see in the film, those lights were more akin to feeble lanterns. What then took place here? The production team probably wanted to ensure that the actors and the set were easily visible to the spectators. Everything appears cold and white in that light. Dramatic and easier to see. However, it's a massive blooper moment for history buffs. A 1912 ship with a flashlight that looks modern is similar to witnessing someone take a picture on the Titanic. However, some of the other Titanic bloopers are so absurd that they'll leave you wondering the reasoning behind the film as a whole. 5. Rose and Jack would never have crossed paths. We were all enamored with the tale of love. Jack, poor boy with a golden heart. Rose, the wealthy girl imprisoned in a golden cage. It's romantic. Bold and among the most recognizable love tales ever depicted on film. However, the reality is as follows: Jack and Rose would never have met in real life. In those days, class division on ships such as the Titanic were big business. First-class travelers resided in a completely distinct universe with distinct lounges, dining areas, corridors, and even stairways. They didn't simply choose not to interact with third-class travelers. It was physically impossible due to the ship's layout. Rose would have enjoyed fine dining, sophisticated music, and formal dresses. In contrast, Jack would have been crammed into small spaces in steerage, basic cuisine, as well as an entirely new ship entry. He would not have been permitted on the upper decks or close to first-class areas unless he entered covertly or received authorization. Yes, the film provides Jack with, even if he manages to secure those third-class spots in a poker game, the concept: imagine him dancing with high society while exploring the upper deck and drawing affluent women. It is highly unlikely. Class distinctions served as the foundation for the actual Titanic. It was structural rather than social. Thus, although the love narrative makes us swoon, Rose and Jack actually most likely wouldn't have met, much less fell in love. It creates fantastic narratives. However, it falls short of historical accuracy. 4. The Statue of Liberty in discoloration. As the film comes to a close, we catch a of Rose gazing at Liberty's statue. It is intended to metaphorically symbolize a fresh start and an optimistic future. However, even if the image is stunning, Lady Liberty is erect in her. This is why the now iconic hue green is wholly untrue historically. The Statue of Liberty would not have been green in 1912. You see, when the Statue of Liberty was being built in the late 1980s, she was a dazzling, copper hue, similar to a fresh penny. The copper eventually started to rust in form. Today, we are all familiar with the green patina. The problem is that change required many decades to finish. The statue was under construction by 1912, the year the Titanic set sail. Of going green, but had yet to do so. Historical images from the era reveal a brownish or splotchy green look, and most definitely not the completely green form portrayed in the film. Additionally, Lady Liberty appears flawless in that last picture, devoid of any yellowing or streaks. However, the monument was already deteriorating in real life, with some areas even displaying wear. Even while the film aimed for that iconic appearance, let's face it, it's difficult to dispute how as striking as it is on television, a streaky brown Lady Liberty would have been the ideal choice in real life. 3. Jack's false account of ice fishing. This one is concealed deep among the details and is a cunning blooper. When Rose is clearly overwhelmed, Jack stands in the rear of the ship, prepared to make some dreadful choices. To prevent her. He diverts her attention by discussing his Lake Wissota ice fishing experience. Back at home. It's a very poignant and witty moment. However, once you learn the reality, the unpleasant moment begins to unravel. You know what? Lake Wissota, when the Titanic sank, the lake that Jack was referring to was non-existent. Jack claims that he once went ice fishing on Lake Wissota, expressing how difficult it was to persuade Rose that her plan would not work out. Indeed, it seems plausible till further investigation is done. In 1912, the Titanic sank, but Lake Wissota wasn't made for more than 5 years. Why? Since Lake Wissota is a man-made reservoir. It was created when Wisconsin's Wissota Dam was constructed. Prior to that, it was merely land and river, not a lake for ice fishing. Jack was unaware of a lake that actually didn't yet exist. What does this mean, then? Perhaps Jack was fabricating the story to save Rose. Or perhaps the authors made a minor mistake. In any case, this amusing little fact demonstrates even situations with excellent writing might have anachronisms. 2. The unfinished Picasso painting. Recall the scenario in which Rose is ogling the Titanic's exquisite artwork? At one point, she makes a point about among the items she carried with her were a Picasso picture. It's intended to demonstrate her culture and rebelliousness by selecting contemporary art over staid tradition. However, this plot's flaw is that the Picasso painting that was shown in the film wasn't even completed in 1912. It wasn't until 1916 that the particular painting was on public display. For years following the Titanic's demise, Picasso was actually still in the middle in 1912 of creating his well-known Cubist style. His now famous works included a number of finished yet or weren't well known enough for a rich family like Rose's to buy. Furthermore, it doesn't end there. Additionally, some of the other pieces of art displayed in that setting weren't on the first Titanic. Some may have had copies circulating around, while others did not yet exist. Not the originals, but somewhere in the vicinity. The notion that Rose possessed this assortment of innovative modern art was more about showcasing her visionary personality than being true to history. Even though imagining lost masterpieces is a wonderful idea, actually, that Picasso picture never enjoyed a first-class atmosphere before sinking with the ship. A Titanic Ticket. It's a lovely work of fiction. Not one that matches, though, the chronology of art history. However, if you found this blooper alarming, the final one will astound you beyond belief. 1. The vanishing first-line Jack and Rose's sketching session is one of the movie's most memorable scenes. It's wonderfully shot and emotionally charged. However, something doesn't quite add up if you look closely. When Jack begins sketching, his initial line is bold, substantial, and easily readable on the page. However, later on, when we view the completed sketch again, the initial heavy stroke is fully gone. Much finer, more delicate lines with a more polished style have taken its place. What became to that initial bold mark, then? The solution is straightforward: the illustration displayed on screen was not completed in real time. A professional made the final sketch separately. Artist, and the lengthy opening line was probably only a portion of the show, but it didn't make it into the finished piece of art. However, what are your thoughts? Which of these bloopers do you think are most astounding? Tell us in the space provided for comments below. If you like this video, remember to click on the next one that appears on your screen. And follow us on YouTube for additional updates.